we speak. We expect the results of that vote any moment now. But Briar, tell me more about the people behind you and what you have been hearing from the people of Britain as this key historic vote takes place.
Well, you know, it's a divided Commons and it's a divided scene out here. Where I'm standing, there's about several thousand people behind me, and most of the people here are people that want to stay in the EU. They're taking part in a campaign for what's being called a people's vote, and what they're asking for really is a second referendum. Now, there's a number of MPs that support this, but Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn hasn't been very vocal in his support for that, and certainly it's not something that Conservatives are considering, but there is a lot of public support. Down in front of Parliament, you also have a lot of people holding signs saying leave means leave. They want to see the UK leave the EU by any means necessary. They don't really particularly like this deal. Some of them are saying maybe no deal is the best solution. Britain can leave and will continue to trade with Europe under WTO rules. That's a possibility. So you really have a lot of opinions, and that's why you have so many people down here, because people get how historic this is and how it can really shape not only what's going on in the UK, but the UK's relationship with the rest of Europe. And a lot of people that I've been chatting with down here today, they've traveled from all across England to be here. People from the north, people from the south coast. They really felt it was important for them to be here and participate in democracy. And I should mention, you know, talking about how important it is to be here, there is a Labour MP who was scheduled to have a cesarean section today, and she decided to postpone it for a day so she could come here to vote. In fact, she was just wheeled into the Commons in a wheelchair just before the vote was called. So that just gives you a sense of how much a priority this is for everyone.
And Briar, is there a sense, you know, you talk about this, a people's vote, that there is an appetite from some in the UK for another referendum? Are those people who want to remain? Are they people who want to leave? Are they both?
For the most part, they're people that want to remain because they feel that the first time around when there was the referendum, they feel that the campaigns were based on a lot of misinformation. They believe that people who wanted to leave originally, now that they've seen this deal and actually what leaving entails and what some of the implications are, they think people would vote very differently this time around. I should also mention that in discussions about a people's vote, some people want to see the voting age lowered to 16 because, of course, when you're talking about, you know, the future of the UK, young people are going to be affected by that, and young people, you know, the teens don't necessarily get the right to vote. So there has been talk about lowering the voting age. But in terms of having a second referendum, this is something that Conservatives have not been keen on. They've been talking about how Brexit means Brexit, how there has already been a vote.
Sorry to interrupt, but let's listen. We're going to take you back inside the House of Commons. And just moments ago, we heard someone inside the House of Commons, the Speaker, I believe, say lock the doors. And so we are expecting that vote has taken place. Those MPs are back inside the House of Commons, and that any moment now, we are going to get the results of that vote that has counted as people left the House of Commons. They went into two separate rooms, those voting in favor of this deal, those voting against. And at any moment, we do expect the announcement of that result to take place. And the key question will be, it is expected to be defeated, but by just how much? Okay, so we're going to give Briar Stewart a little bit of a break. We're going to go back to her in a moment, but today's Brexit vote is obviously going to impact businesses globally, including hundreds of Canadian companies. Peter Armstrong joins me in the studio for that angle. And again, Peter, excuse me if I interrupt you. No, it could happen at any second, but let's just talk about how businesses are preparing for this.
Well, I mean, businesses in the UK and businesses abroad that do business in the UK and in Europe, for that matter, have become very adept at navigating uncertainty. uncertainty through this, right? They've known that this is a shifting sand, and they know that this vote, I mean, some of them will be watching this. Obviously, it's important. They call it the most important vote since the Second World War, but the impact of this vote isn't the vote itself. It's what comes after this vote. It's what will Jeremy Corbyn do. And so they're watching that. I think currency traders and markets are watching the margin. I mean, Breyer was talking about the political ramifications of a margin, and is it less than 75 votes, that gives her more room to maneuver in Brussels. If it's more than 200, then, you know, less room to maneuver. I think from a financial market and currency market side, you begin to see a real impact on pound sterling immediately on a vote, if there's a big margin or a little margin, depending on that. But what everybody's waiting to see here isn't the result, because I think we all kind of know what's going to happen there. We might well be surprised, but it certainly didn't sound that way. What we're waiting to see now is what will happen. Will they try to extend? How quickly will Jeremy Corbyn declare a vote of non-confidence and collapse this government and go back to the polls? What will be the mandate of such an election campaign? And what impact will that have on all this uncertainty? And so back to the question about how businesses are handling this, they're trying to navigate their way through all this as best they can. I mean, we're hearing stories about companies that have really jacked up as much production as they can to try to get stuff out the door because they don't know what they're going to be able to do on March 29th, how they're going to ship it to customers, how they're going to get it to them, how they're going to get paid, let alone pay their employees. I mean, there's a robotics firm that we keep hearing about that's doing exactly that. One of their big concerns is like 2/3 of their employees are European working in the UK. What will happen to them? So all that uncertainty is something that has become, frankly, kind of rote. And I think a lot of the businesses and a lot of the financial sector, you look at the City of London, have been saying, okay, this is what we'll do if, and this is what we'll do if that, and this is what we'll do if that. Today, we get a little bit limiting on what those options are. We're pushed slightly closer, I think, to a no Brexit crashing the gates deal. Yep. We're probably looking at the most likely scenario is another extension, and how that'll play out is frankly just more uncertainty, which means less growth, which means less investment, which means, you know, more of the same for all these businesses.
Peter, thank you. Again, let's take a look inside the House of Commons, as we do expect the results to be announced at any moment now. Breyer Stewart is standing outside the British Houses of Parliament, and it looks like it's quite packed in there, that they have locked the doors, that just about everybody is inside the House of Commons for what is a historic vote. We heard Sir John Curtis earlier say probably the most important vote since the Second World War to take place in Britain has taken place, we believe, and that is why we are seeing MPs back inside the House of Commons as we await the results of this vote. There is a sense, I'm sure, Breyer, in Britain, whether it's outside or inside the House of Commons, that this is a historic moment in the history of that country.
It is. I mean, and it's an interesting conversation because there's no suspense really in whether the vote will be defeated. That's not the question. But why there is a kind of a sense of suspense is there's just so much uncertainty over what's going to happen next. And I got to say, there's also a real sense of fatigue and confusion from people that I've been speaking with in recent days, really, while I've been here. A lot of people just don't understand the political bickering going back and forth. They don't understand why the government has been able to make more headway. I spoke to one gentleman who said, you know, we've been talking about Brexit and leaving the EU for more than 2 years now, and during that time we haven't been speaking about other important domestic issues like healthcare and housing. So there is a fair amount of fatigue. But that being said, with this vote, you know, likely being defeated tonight, there's also some optimism among the crowd that wants to stay in the EU, that perhaps this is another big obstacle that could keep the UK in the Union.
All
March
right,
29th,
Breyer,
of course,
sorry to interrupt,
deadline.
but let's listen now to the Speaker of the House of Commons.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
To the right, 202. The noes, order. The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. On a point of order. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken and the Government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
Order. There's no good people shouting. There will be an opportunity for other points of order, but the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Those whose jobs rely on our trade with the EU need that clarity. So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to set out briefly how the Government intends to proceed. First, we need to confirm whether this Government still enjoys the confidence of the House. I believe that it does, but given the scale and importance of tonight's vote, it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening, in the form required by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, the Government will make time to debate that motion tomorrow. And if, as happened before Christmas, the official opposition declined to do so, we will, on this occasion, consider making time tomorrow to debate any motion in the form required from the other opposition parties, should they put one forward. Second, if the House confirms its confidence in this Government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The Government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Third, if these meetings yield such ideas, the Government will then explore them with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by offering two reassurances. The first is to those who fear that the Government's strategy is to run down the clock to the 29th of March. That is not our strategy. I've always believed that the best way forward is to leave in an orderly way with a good deal, and have devoted much of the last 2 years negotiating such a deal. As you confirmed, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the business motion tabled last week by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, is not legally binding, but the Government respects the will of the House. We will therefore make a statement about the way forward and table an amendable motion by Monday. The second reassurance is to the British people who voted to leave the European Union in the referendum 2.5 years ago. I became Prime Minister immediately after that referendum. I believe it's my duty to deliver on their instruction, and I intend to do so. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The Government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the Government to do just that.
I will come to other colleagues, but first of all, point of order, the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The result of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. I hear the words of the Prime Minister, but actions of her government of the past 2 years speak equally clearly. She is only attempting to reach out now to try to keep her failed process and deal alive after it's been so roundly rejected by Parliament on behalf of the people of this country. Labour has laid out our priorities consistently. No deal must be taken off the table. A permanent customs union must be secured, and people's rights and protections must be guaranteed so they do not fall behind. At every turn, the Prime Minister has closed the door on dialogue. Businesses begged her to negotiate a comprehensive customs union. Trade union leaders pressed her for the same thing. They were ignored. In the last 2 years, she's only had one priority: the Conservative Party. Her governing principle of delay and denial has reached the end of the line. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
First of all, just come to the leader. I will come to the right honourable gentleman, of course, but a point of order, the Leader of the House.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to make a short business statement regarding the business for tomorrow and the remainder of this week.
I'm extraordinarily grateful to the right honourable lady, and I accept that she can't be psychic as to what I'm thinking, and I can't be psychic as to what she's thinking. I think the smooth and orderly way to proceed with this matter is to deal with points of order first, and then to come to the right honourable lady's statement, which would be entirely proper and doubtless helpful to the House. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, we should be aware of the situation that we're in. The clock is ticking. We have got very little time to resolve this. The fact that it has taken us so long to get to this point, frankly, is shameful. This is a humiliating defeat for the government. When I listen to the Prime Minister, it sounds like everybody else is at fault rather than her. She has to accept responsibility for what has happened this evening. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the Leader of the Opposition has come round to a motion of no confidence. That should have happened before, but of course we will support it. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, it is clear the clock is ticking. The government needs to secure the safety of all our nations and should immediately postpone the Article 50 process and should immediately have talks with all the leaders of the opposition parties. Let's work together in all our interests. But let's listen to the voices of the parliamentarians that have been sent here. There is no support for this deal. It mustn't come back again. The obvious thing to do, the right thing to do, suspend Article 50, put this to the people and a people's vote.
I know the right honourable gentleman won't take offence when I say he was using the device of a point of order, as is entirely understandable in these circumstances, to say what he wanted to say, but he was more interested in what he had to say to the House than in anything that I might have to say to him. It's not a matter for the Chair. The right honourable gentleman has registered his view, and these are the sorts of issues that can quite properly be aired in debate and quite conceivably in discussions that take place with the Prime Minister and other party leaders. But he's made his point with force and alacrity, and it's on the record for colleagues to study. I will take the honourable lady first, right honourable lady first, and then others. Point of order, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With this result of a scale that is unprecedented in recent times, it is clear that this deal, nor any tweaks to it, will get through the House of Commons. So can I ask for your guidance, Mr. Speaker, on how Parliament can assert its authority to make sure that we can give the people of this country a say on this deal to resolve this matter? It is a mess that needs to be resolved by the people in a people's vote.
Well, my response to the honourable lady is as follows. First of all, there may well be an opportunity for her to air her own thoughts on that matter, the situation we face and the suggested way forward in the course of debate to which the Prime Minister in her point of order referred. There is that prospect potentially unfolding. So that's one opportunity for the honourable lady. And the second would be those discussions to take place in coming days. And I dare say that the honourable lady will want to take the chance to participate in those. More widely, where there is discussion about Parliament's role and what Parliament might do and what options Parliament might have, I think I can predict with complete confidence that the honourable lady will have a view about that, and that view, which is important, will be heard. And point of order, Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister spoke about the will of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and I think we have to investigate that further. When can we test the will of this House on the choices that are now left? The choices are no deal versus revoking Article 50. Can we test these in the House? And bearing in mind, of course, that in Scotland, the European Union is more popular in the polls than the United Kingdom, and the Prime Minister should know that.
There'll be plenty of opportunity for testing in the days ahead. I think well, can I just take the honourable lady first? Point of order, Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This isn't a political point of order. Yesterday, it was raised the issue of the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, and the fact that she should have been undergoing a caesarean section today for a high-risk pregnancy, and she is comfortable with me saying she has gestational diabetes and was asked by her medical team to undergo that at an early possibility. She has had to defer that despite the advice and comments that you made from the chair yesterday that apparently were given no comfort from the government benches, and I think this is shocking. And I have to say that as a doctor, to put our colleague at risk and her baby at risk because we cannot have a method of allowing those who are sick or pregnant is disgraceful.
Well, I note what the honourable lady says, and I don't cavil at it at all. I made the point yesterday. I thought the situation was lamentable. I used that word, I think, several times. The situation was lamentable. This matter, I'm not interested in people chuntering from a sedentary position to no obvious benefit or purpose. I'm ruling on the matter and I require no assistance in the process of doing so. The situation was lamentable. I thought it better that the honourable lady should have the opportunity of a proxy vote. That was my view, and it was a view widely shared. The matter was debated in February of last year and in September. I had indicated my strong support. It would have been necessary for a resolution to be tabled by the Leader of the House for reasons which others can explain. It's not my job to do their explaining for them. That has not happened. I think it's regrettable, but it cannot be sorted tonight. Nevertheless, she's registered her concern. It's a concern and a sense, frankly, of very deep disappointment, to put it mildly, that I share, and it will doubtless be dealt with in days or weeks to come. And my very great sympathies go to the honourable lady, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, who, in my judgment, should not have been put
And you
in
were
this
listening to the Speaker of the House of Commons in Britain, where that vote has taken place, and it was resoundingly defeated. 432 voting against the government's Brexit deal with the European Union, 202 voting in favour. The CBC's Briar Stewart joins me from outside the British Houses of Parliament. And Briar, there were lots of predictions of just how badly Theresa May's deal would be defeated. I'm not sure too many saw the defeat in this way. This is huge.
It is huge. It's unprecedented. I mean, this is the biggest government defeat since the 1920s. And I have to tell you, the crowd here, when the numbers came up on the screen because they're watching it, there was a huge cheer. And perhaps maybe even a louder cheer a few minutes later when the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, announced that he's going to, that he had tabled a no confidence motion in the government, and the decision was made to debate it tomorrow. Let me tell you, this crowd was very happy about that. Now, what's next? I mean, we heard from Prime Minister Theresa May there. She was talking about, holding a meeting and talking to parties to figure out what she needs to do to get them on board. But boy, does she sure have to get a lot of people on board. The yes vote was 202. She needs 320 people to vote for the deal for this to pass. So that's a lot of people to get on side when she's been repeatedly saying this whole time that the deal she has is the best that the European Union has on offer. So that's why this is all so muddled and there's so much uncertainty, because she's been working for a number of months to get the agreement that they already have. How much further can she move it? And considering that the deadline for the UK leaving the EU is March 29th, I mean, there's a very tight timeline here. Because while people do not like this deal, there is a majority for not leaving the EU without a deal. I mean, that's a big risk for a lot of people. A lot of MPs, a lot of businesses are very concerned about that. But certainly there was nowhere near enough support for this agreement tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it is really incredible to think 432 voting against this deal, 202 in favor. So that is 230 separating the no's from the yeses in this. And that means, Breyer, that many Conservative MPs, it's just the way the math works out here, right? Many of her own Conservative MPs voted against the government's deal.
That's right. I mean, we don't have the official numbers yet, but certainly dozens of them did. And that probably didn't come as a total surprise to her, obviously, because so many of them have been voicing opposition to this deal all the way along. And, despite the fact that she said she was continuing to speak with EU officials over Christmas and the New Year's period, she was not able to get really any meaningful assurances that could help sway Parliament on this. There was very little movement made on the contentious issue of the Irish backstop, which would prevent the return of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And that, while that is kind of the most contentious part in all of this, there's other things about this deal that people don't like. So some see it as being too tied to the EU still, as if it's kind of under EU rules. There are some that just don't like the idea of having to pay the EU $39 billion to exit the union. So, the Irish backstop was the most contentious part in all this, but that's certainly not the only point that people take issue with. And, it's going to be a very tough challenge for her now to try to salvage this deal, particularly when she hasn't been able to make a lot of movement on it all this way along.
Breyer, thank you. We will get back in touch very soon, but for now, thank you. That is the CBC's Breyer Stewart outside the Houses of Parliament in London. And Randall Hansen is here from the Monk School of Global Affairs here in Toronto, along with our CBC business correspondent, Peter Armstrong. All right, to talk about this as a huge defeat. I mean, I don't think we can find the words to describe how deafening, how big this defeat is. I don't know whether people saw this. 230 votes separating the yes and the no's. This is a huge defeat for Theresa May. I don't know, how does she stay on as Prime Minister?
It's massive. It's 10 higher than the highest estimates, which were about 220. And it's the greatest defeat since the 1920s, when Ramsay...
100 years.
Yeah, Ramsay, almost 100 years. 1924, Ramsay MacDonald suffered a terrible defeat of about 166. He is famous for destroying his political party and going down in history as one of the worst UK prime ministers of the 20th century. We'll see where we go from here. I don't think we go back to Brussels. Peter just showed me a tweet from Donald Tusk that suggests he sees very little point in continuing the conversation. Yeah. Had it been a smaller defeat, say 80, the Europeans, and we're not talking actually Brussels, we need agreement among the heads of state of the 27 remaining members of the European Union, might have offered a slight adjustment in the deal. I think that's probably off the table.
He hints at that staying in the UK, or staying in the EU, is still possible for the UK after all of this, but that says the UK needs to make its intentions clear after this Brexit defeat.
Well,
I think
and what
nothing
he
is
said,
clear.
the one we were referring to is, if a deal is impossible and no one wants a no deal, then who will finally have the courage to say what the only positive solution is? Which I think is saying remain, right?
Yeah, either withdraw Article 50 entirely and simply remain, or
and
hold...
Article 50 is the mechanism whereby a country withdraws from the EU, so just throw that out for now?
And the EU's already said, I mean, there was a legal case, the EU will accept a withdrawal letter. It set a 2-year clock, which is running out on March 29th, or ask for delay in the context of a second referendum. I don't think, again, the heads of state, not Brussels, the heads of state, will agree to a delay simply so the Brits have more time to figure out what they want, because they've had 2 years and there's already no unity.
There's certainly not. And then we just have about 30 seconds left or so, but just your sense on there is going to be a non-confidence debate and vote tomorrow. Would the vote be tomorrow as well? Yep, the vote would be tomorrow. That has been tabled by the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think that Theresa May and her government could survive that no-confidence vote, given the deafening defeat that she has suffered this afternoon?
Well, it comes to what I said earlier on your show. Normally, she would be gone now, but Brexit has entirely overturned the constitutional rules of the United Kingdom. I think she's actually going to survive because, again, the DUP in Northern Ireland does not want to see Jeremy Corbyn in power because they regard him as a terrorist sympathizer. So the DUP will vote with the Conservatives. Most Conservatives fear Corbyn, who wants sort of a Venezuela, economic Venezuela on the Thames. They will, despite voting against, will vote in favour tomorrow. And the last point, I know we're running out of time, if you look at the polls, Theresa May is still as popular at about 40% as Jeremy Corbyn. So he's not enjoying an electoral a win.
All right. Much more to come. You're watching CBC News Network. We're going to continue following the story. The British Parliament has voted down the Brexit deal.
Motion, but if not, I suggest to the House that we proceed to subsequent
A live shot
motions,
inside Britain's House of Commons. It is the Brexit deal's day of reckoning. Just minutes ago, MPs overwhelmingly decided to reject the divorce agreement that Prime Minister Theresa May negotiated with the European Union. The numbers, 202 for the deal, 432 against. The historic vote comes on the heels of 54 hours of debate over 8 days and more than 30 months after that stunning referendum that chose to end the UK's 46-year membership of the European Economic Bloc. Opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn has called for a no-confidence vote in the government tomorrow, and the British Prime Minister Theresa May spoke before Corbyn and expressed her disappointment in the vote.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock!
The House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
Immediately after May spoke, opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn weighed in, leaving no doubt about his next move.
The result of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. I hear the words of the Prime Minister, but actions of her government of the past 2 years speak equally clearly. She is only attempting to reach out now to try to keep her failed process and deal alive after it's been so roundly rejected by Parliament on behalf of the people of this country. Labour has laid out our priorities consistently. No deal must be taken off the table. A permanent customs union must be secured, and people's rights and protections must be guaranteed so they do not fall behind. At every turn, the Prime Minister has closed the door on dialogue. Businesses begged her to negotiate a comprehensive customs union. Trade union leaders pressed her for the same thing. They were ignored. In the last 2 years, she's only had one priority: the Conservative Party. Her governing principle of delay and denial has reached the end of the line. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
The CBC's Briar Stewart has spent the day with the crowds outside the Houses of Parliament. She is with us again live. How would you describe the mood there, Briar?
Well, let me tell you, there was a lot of excitement when the numbers on the meaningful vote finally came up on the screen. People knew it was going to be defeated, but when they saw by just how much, there was a lot of cheering. And there was a lot of cheers, too, when the Labour leader said that he had tabled the motion of no confidence in the government. Where I'm standing, there was a rally going on for the people's vote, so what the crowd here is advocating for is really a second referendum. They are Remainers, they do not want to leave the EU. But of course, now that this vote or the deal was defeated so resoundingly, the question is just what happens next. Now, we have heard some reaction from top European officials. I'll just read it to you here because they put a couple of notes out on Twitter. Donald Tusk, who's the European Council president, he says if a deal is impossible and no one wants a deal, no one wants one deal, then who will finally have the courage to say what the only possible solution is? So there he appears to be hinting at that maybe the best solution in all of this is no Brexit. The president of the European Commission, who we know canceled his meetings tomorrow in order to be available for emergency meetings on Brexit, he also took to Twitter and he said, I take note with regret of the outcome of the vote in the House of Commons this evening. I urge the UK to clarify its intentions as soon as possible. Time is almost up on Brexit. That's, of course, a key factor in all of this, is that March 29th deadline. Now, that deadline is in place because of when the government triggered Article 50. The government could decide to extend it. It is within its power. It's allowed. However, Prime Minister Theresa May has said that she is not really wanting to do that. Now, she hasn't ruled it out completely, but she certainly doesn't favor that. And that's why the clock is really ticking, because if there's no agreement that MPs can get behind and support, it becomes increasingly likely that the UK could leave the EU without a deal.
And I mean, the complicating factor to all of this, Briar, is just because, we can listen to what EU officials say, but just because people voted resoundingly against this deal doesn't mean that they want to stay necessarily in the EU. These could have been Brexiteers that voted against this deal because they don't like it for a whole variety of reasons, right? So to say that the only solution now is for Britain to stay in the EU, that might please some, but it'll disappoint many others.
Oh yeah, you bet. It will certainly frustrate a lot of others. I mean, the reason the UK is in this position in the first place is because of the referendum back in 2016 and the fact that a majority of the people voted to leave the European Union. So the agreement was voted down, and it's so unpopular for a number of reasons, but there's a lot of people that want to leave the Union that didn't support the agreement because of the different provisions. Most notably, the contentious Irish backstop. That really is the thorniest of all of the issues. It is a provision that would be triggered at the end of 2020 if the UK and the EU don't come up with some kind of permanent arrangement. That's an issue that a lot of the MPs have really been speaking out against, and that's really the area where Theresa May had tried to get assurances from European officials, and she wasn't able to do that. So the question is now, just how can she move beyond this vote? I mean, the Conservatives would need 118 more MPs to support it if they took it to a second vote. And she has been negotiating up throughout this whole time to try to shape this agreement with EU officials. And there really is a question just how much more she can do, because that's still a lot of MPs to get on board. But of course, the next big obstacle she's going to face is the no confidence vote tomorrow. We know that it's been tabled and it's going to be debated, and that vote will be held tomorrow. So another big day. And
ironically, Briar, if what we're understanding is, despite the fact that she was so badly defeated in this vote on Brexit, it seems as though people think that she will and her government will survive a no confidence vote tomorrow.
That's right, it is very likely to succeed because the Democratic Unionist Party, which is the Northern Irish Party, it props up May's minority government. And it has said, officials from the party have said, that they're going to support May and the Conservatives in a confidence vote. So that's why it's likely that the no confidence vote will be defeated. But that's just one other step in a series of obstacles. May is going to have to come back to Parliament within 3 sitting days with some kind of plan B, so she really only has until Monday. It is very likely that over the next couple of days she's going to be meeting with European officials again to try to figure out what she can do to sweeten this deal and try to get more people on board. But again, when you need 118 more people to support it, it is very challenging.
Yeah, the numbers just don't seem to be there. Briar, thank you for now. The CBC's Briar Stewart live in London. So now, to break down today's vote, what led up to it and what the coming days and weeks will look like, for that, let's do two things. First, we're going to bring back Randall Hansen of the Monk School of Global Affairs in Toronto. He's with me here in the studio. And we're also going to introduce Joe Twyman in London. He is the director and co-founder of Data Poll. And Peter Armstrong, the CBC's Peter Armstrong, is also with me here. So, Joe, let me start with you. The result was expected. What should we, but what did you make of that defeat? 432 voting against, 202 voting in favor. I don't think very many people saw a defeat quite that big.
No, that's right. The whole question swirling around Westminster today was, how big would the defeat be? There was never really any question that the defeat would come, so everyone was discussing the magnitude, and there were suspicions that perhaps it might be as low as 50. John McDonnell, the Labour deputy leader, was on the radio this morning saying he thought actually the Conservatives were talking down their chances and that actually 50 might be reasonable. You had other people saying, well, 3 figures might be manageable. But a defeat of this magnitude is right on the upper bounds of expectation and really a disaster for the government. But at the same time, does it actually change anything? Well, arguably not. We find ourselves where we were before Christmas, knowing that this would be defeated. The magnitude of defeat means that some sort of tinkering around the edges will not produce a victory. And so Theresa May finds herself having to go back, at least to some extent, to the drawing board, and now facing a no-confidence motion tomorrow, which she's pretty much certain to win, just delaying the process even further.
So, Joe, what do you think parliamentarians were telling Theresa May in the vote that took place today? I know they voted for a variety of reasons, but what do you think was the message that they were trying to send?
My sense is that they were sending the message that not only was this deal not good enough, it wasn't nearly good enough. It wasn't close enough to the expectations of all sides of the debate. The Remainers felt it didn't go nearly far enough towards their side. The Leavers were furious that it went far too far away from what they wanted. And so we find ourselves in a situation where there's really no obvious way forward. There are lots of ways forward that people have suggested, but none of them are popular. When you ask the public which is the most popular option, you find that the two, if you like, extreme options, no deal Brexit and remaining in the EU, they're pretty much neck and neck as the most popular options. But both of those get under a third of support. And then when you go to options within those two extremes, things like a renegotiation, an extension of Article 50, or indeed May's deal as was put forward, that gets fewer than 1 in 5 people supporting it. And so there's nothing that gets a majority support in the public, there's nothing that gets majority support in Parliament, and what that means is the clock is ticking and there's no obvious way forward.
And so, Randall, what do you think? Does that mean that that Britain on March 29th, in 9 or 10 weeks from now, could crash right out of the EU, not necessarily because it wants to, but because there just seems to be this stalemate, both in Parliament and in the British public?
Well, theoretically it could, but there's even less support within Parliament for a hard Brexit than any of the, and Joe's quite right, not entirely popular options. I suspect what we're going to get is a series of what are called indicative votes, testing support in Parliament for several options: a second referendum, possibly Corbyn's suggestions of simply staying in the customs union but not the single market, or the Norway option, going into the European free trade area, staying in the single market and the customs union, or just the single market. And if Parliament shows definitive support for one of those, and knows what it wants, then it could go back to Brussels. So I think this really has to be put to Parliament, and effectively Parliament has demanded it, that it be put to Parliament.
Well, and I mean, I'd be interested in either of your takes on how much does this vote, and I guess the margin of this vote, does it take what happens now out of the hands of Westminster and put way more power in the hands of Brussels? They can say, okay, You want to test the waters on a Norway option or a customs union or whatever it may be, we'll extend on that, but on nothing else. And if not, then you're crashing on March 29th. Like, Brussels seems to have gained an enormous upper hand here. Am I wrong in reading that?
No, you're not wrong. I think they've always had the upper hand. I mean, that was
Fair.
delusional on the part of the Brexiters that we hold all the cards. You're negotiating with a superpower, and Britain is leaving. The one leaving is in a structurally disadvantaged position. But I'll let Joe come in. That would be mine.
Yeah, Joe, I'd love to hear that, because I'm fascinated by who sort of gets to dictate these next moves.
I would say that Brussels is certainly in the strong position, but as was mentioned, this has been the situation throughout. This has been presented, at least in this country, as a negotiation, but really it's a very one-sided negotiation. When you have a relatively small country and a relatively small population like Britain, yes, you have some sway and you can pull some leaders and you can hope for a degree of goodwill. But as any country that has negotiated with a large trading bloc, whether that's the United States, whether that's China, or whether that's the European Union, knows that they hold, if not all of the cards, then certainly a great number of them. What I think this does is places the likelihood of an extension back on the table. It increases the likelihood of an extension of Article 50, an extension of that deadline that at the moment sits at March 29th. And what Brussels will enact in order to grant that extension remains to be seen. I imagine that if Parliament agreed to a new general election or a second referendum, then Brussels would not hesitate to grant an extension to Article 50. But to carry on the negotiations when they've already said that nothing more can come of it, I can't see that. So that leaves the option of Britain unilaterally withdrawing from Article 50, something which the European Court has said
to leave the European Union, right? That, just to be clear, the Article 50 for our Canadian audiences, Article 50 is that mechanism to leave the European Union. So you think, Joe, that this actually, that March 29th deadline is now in question, that we could actually see Britain stay in the EU beyond that date as all of this mess gets sorted out?
Yes, I think, sorry, forgive me, Article 50, as you say, this mechanism for exiting the EU, we could unilaterally exit that process. So we could exit Brexit, if you like, just to make things even more confusing. And so that, I don't think that's off the table. What is certain is that there is nothing like a majority support for no deal within Parliament. That really does seem to be the least popular option. And so, as was previously said, I think a series of votes over the next few days. Bear in mind, Theresa May has only 3 days to come up with an alternative now, and to move things forward. It may be that we see debates and votes around the various different options that are already on the table because other countries have them. And so that means Norway, that means Canada, and that means perhaps a no-deal Brexit. But we have great uncertainty here, and it's the key point is that today, while it has not made things any better for the government by any means, it certainly hasn't made anything clearer. We stand here as confused and as uncertain about the future as we were a week ago, as we were a month ago, and really as we were when the referendum result came in.
Peter? A couple of really quick points. One, those 3 days are 3 sitting days. So I think that'll actually take us to Monday.
Takes us to Monday,
I believe. Two, just as an illustration of the amount of how much this was all priced in, financial markets have been watching through this vote and then reacting to the vote. As the vote hit, they all fell a little bit, not as much as you might have expected. They've all completely rebounded to where they were just before the vote now. So a lot of that kind of stuff was built in. And it speaks to the fact that we are no further really along the process now than we were before Christmas. Though I think, you know, if you had door number 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're now down to door number 1 or 2, I guess, in terms of, you know, some kind of a referendum, some kind of an extension with very strict rules or terms as set by Brussels.
Randall?
Yeah. No, agreed. I think this is obvious to everyone who's participating in this debate, but we have to recall this was not a vote on Brexit. This was not what Brexit was going to be. This was a vote on the transitional period for 24 months, at the end of which there would be the final Brexit. So there might have been, yeah. So even had this deal passed, we would still be in the same torturous situation. So what I actually think Canada is now off the table, because what Canada, the Canada option, or Canada Plus, or Plus Plus, the various Canadian versions, the Canada option meant effectively the Canada-EU free trade deal for Britain, which is, say, free trade in goods, very limited in services. That took 7 years for us to negotiate.
And people. And not people.
And not people, absolutely not. So, frankly, a much, much worse deal than the United Kingdom currently has with the European Union. But there's no way that's going to happen before 29th March. So I think Canada's now off the table. Canada was a likely endpoint had the deal passed.
With just some reaction now from Boris Johnson, the former foreign minister, who says this deal is dead. He says, it's so evidently a bad deal for the UK that the vote has given the PM May a mandate to go back to Brussels and say this won't work for us. So, and that Johnson says that the backstop has got to go. That's probably, Joe, that's probably not a surprise to hear from Boris Johnson and his reaction to all of this.
No, it's really repeating what we've heard repeatedly from Boris Johnson. He focuses on the backstop on this particular occasion, which is this specific bit around well, what happens if no deal is not arranged after the end of the withdrawal agreement in years to come. What does that mean for Northern Ireland? And it's this that has been the highly contentious issue with the Democratic Unionists, the government's coalition partners, the Conservatives' coalition partners in government. And so the focus is on that in this particular statement, but in actual fact, consistently Boris Johnson has made it clear that he doesn't like this deal at all. He thinks it goes far too far towards Europe. He also, crucially, believes that it doesn't respect the result of the referendum. And this will be a key matter of debate moving forward about what form Brexit takes and whether it can be judged on true criteria. Firstly, do people think it is good for the country? And secondly, do they think that it respects the result of the referendum? Any deal, if it's going to have anything like the level of success that it needs in Parliament, but also in the public, must, to at least some degree, answer those two questions positively. And so far, whether it's Canada Plus Plus, whether it's Norway Plus Plus, hard Brexit, blind Brexit, all these various different things, no one can really come up with something that fulfills those two criteria.
We're also getting just some information from the UK Prime Minister's spokesperson, who says that she is not resigning. She's focusing on delivering the Brexit that people voted for, that that confidence motion is going to take place at 1900 GMT, so that is minus 5 hours, help me, that is 2 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow, that the Prime Minister still believes that she has the confidence of the House, and also that we don't necessarily agree that Article 50 will have to be extended. Joe, just a quick reaction to all of that. What do you make of what the Prime Minister's office is saying?
It was entirely expected. You would expect a statement from the Prime Minister at this stage. You would expect her to say that she fights on, she fights to win, to quote another female Prime Minister from this country. She is confident of winning the no confidence motion thanks to the support for the DUP. They have said they will support her. In fact, they have suggested that they will always support her in matters of no confidence. And so she may be hoping that that vote gives her actually some positive momentum. Winning that means that she can carry on. For precisely how long she carries on once we get through this, if we ever get through this, remains, of course, to be seen and will be a matter of some debate.
But, Joe, she said the UK, the spokesman also says that the Prime Minister still believes her deal can form the basis of a deal that wins support of Parliament. Joe, how is that possible that after this defeat, that the spokesperson would be able to say that on her behalf, that she still thinks that her deal is going to win a majority that it needs in Parliament? It seems to me impossible.
It's almost certainly not true. It's that simple. This is spin. And you would not expect a spokesperson for the Prime Minister to come out and say, you know what, we really messed that up. We don't know what to do now. That's not.
But there needs to be some
Instead,
recognition, of just how bad the defeat was. Don't you think that that would be something that you would normally do when you have the worst defeat in about 100 years?
You would think under normal circumstances that kind of behaviour might be appropriate and realistic. And these are not normal circumstances, so quite frankly, all bets are off. It sounds like that statement was prepared before they knew the magnitude of the loss, that they haven't changed it, and so now they're just happy to just drive on regardless of the reality that swirls around them.
To be fair, I should say the spokesman says we're obviously disappointed with the result, but it's important to try to move forward. Randall Hansen here in studio, along with the CBC's Peter Armstrong and Joe Twyman in London. Thank you all very much. The president of the EU Commission has weighed in with his reaction to today's vote online. Jean-Claude Juncker expressed his disappointment on the rejection of Theresa May's deal, saying this: "I take note with regret of the outcome of the vote in the House of Commons this evening. I